And I'll be provocative and add Taiwan to that mix. I can say that now I'm no longer in government, but it's irresponsible not to use and benefit from the expertise that Taiwan has in so many areas. I'm not saying you have to recognize the country. We have a one China policy, fine. But in terms of their capabilities, we went through a pandemic. Taiwan has some of the best medical care you can get in the world. Having the ability to work with Taiwan, which we did, bringing vaccines and medical providers to the Pacific, we saved lives through that partnership. So my view is we should work with everyone who is of like mind, and that includes places like Taiwan too.
This is a little bit off the topic that we've been talking about, but you just brought Taiwan up again. I was just recently at a roundtable with Peter Dutton and some folks at ASPE in DC, and we went around and around for a while just talking about some of the similar issues that we've talked about here in our little group cast. But at one point, Dutton looked over at me and he said, "Hey, if it goes down in Taiwan, what are you guys going to do? Are you there, right?" And that's
a whole nother podcast, Matt. That's a whole nother podcast.
I don't want to get into the what you think the politics behind it are, but I'm curious. You were just there in Taiwan. What are the thoughts of the folks on the ground? They think? What do they think?
It's fascinating being in Taiwan. I went down to Kinmen Island while I was there, which is literally you can swim to the mainland from there. You can see it, and you can see all the ships in between. The various Coast Guard and Navy vessels. It's congested, and yet in Taiwan, it's such a dynamic, vibrant place. I was there for the inauguration of the new government, and on the one hand, the threat from the PRC and the statements from Xi and others, that's an existential threat to the country's very existence. And look, I just said country, which I probably shouldn't, right? But I think it has all the attributes of a nation state from what I learned in international law, in my classes decades ago. So it's a political decision, right? What we do or how we describe Taiwan. But if you're there, it's a successful place. It's had an amazing transition from martial law to one of the most vibrant democracies in the region. It's a model, I think. We've talked about the economic consequence of any conflict in Taiwan in terms of the semiconductors that they export to the rest of the world, but also just in terms of democracy and freedom and all those principles that I think we stand for. Taiwan matters, but yet the people there are so positive, so resilient. I don't think they think about the threat from the PRC at the start of every morning. They're more interested in working and contributing and being part of the democracy. And they've been criticized for that, right? That they haven't done enough to defend themselves. In all honesty, if you just compare the two places, Taiwan will never be able to do everything it can to defend itself if there's a determined, opposition or threat from the PRC. So I do think it's incumbent on us to help defend Taiwan. And that has been the U.S. policy, right? We sell defense articles and material to Taiwan to assist in its defense. The U.S. policy for decades has been strategic ambiguity. This idea that, we have a relationship with Taiwan. It's not the official relationship in terms of one China policy, but we will assist in providing that means to defend themselves. Never yet explained what that means, to keep the PRC guessing as to what we would do. Peter Dutton's question, what would the U.S. do? I'm of the view that the world is no longer as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And why? It's because just look at what happened a couple of days ago with the PRC exercising, a virtual quarantine or blockade of Taiwan, exercising annually potential invasion plans for Taiwan. That's relatively new. The coercive behavior of the PLA, Navy, and Coast Guard around Taiwan and other places in the Pacific is much more aggressive now than ever before. So my view is that we should probably move from a policy of strategic ambiguity to one of greater strategic clarity. And just say, look, America and like-minded countries like Australia, we're all about defending democracy, and we will defend democracy in Taiwan. Maintain ambiguity as to exactly how we will do that. I don't want to curtail the options that our military need to have some flexibility as to how exactly we would achieve that. But I think we need to be clearer with the PRC and everyone else that Taiwan is something we're willing to defend, in my view.
Matt, did you spend much time up there at all? Did you have any time in Taiwan when you were wearing that white, crisp uniform?
No, I spent plenty of time in China, but never Taiwan. I've been through this strait a couple of times. But that conversation that I had with those folks at ASPE was a pretty in-depth one about, it was very germane to what we're talking about today. And I know a few folks that have spent some time there. I actually have a cousin that's living there right now. And I was just curious what the thought is on the ground, because that goes a long way, right? If there's faith there, that faith is like projected out to China. They really believe, the U.S., Australia, whoever is coming over, and if they believe that, they may have a reason for believing that, right? So
and that's
part of it.
I agree, Matt, and I'd certainly noticed, increased confidence in the people in Taiwan. They consider themselves Taiwanese. If you go to Taipei now and say I speak Mandarin, they'll correct you, and they'll say we speak Taiwanese here. Which they wouldn't have done a few years ago.
Okay.
They are confident that their model is the one they want to keep. And I think other countries are being a little bit more, visible in their support. Talk about Japan, right? We talked about the Japanese self-defense force. The military is only there for the protection of Japan.
Not for much longer, I don't think.
No, exactly. But even about Taiwan, they have been more and more visible in terms of their operations in the Taiwan Straits and in the vicinity, much more vocal politically about the importance of Taiwan, because they see the risk to their own islands of the Senkakus, right?
Sure.
And so it's changing. It is changing. And I think people are becoming a little bit more vocal about the importance of Taiwan, not just to the people of Taiwan, but to all of us. And why? Well, unfortunately, it's because of the increased threat from the People's Republic of China.
Good question for you both. In 1945, there was a piece of paper signed on board a U.S. aircraft carrier, which now we see the Japanese Self-Defense Force, coming to their own. We need them as a region, I guess, right, to be expeditionary and to have a few. How do you rescind that document, as a government? Given what had happened, all those years ago, is it something you forget about? How does that work?
I think that's strictly too limited a view. In all honesty, we talk about fighting the fight as far as we can from America's shores, right? The defense of the homeland, our self-defense, begins at the international date line, right? And I think the Japanese are expanding their interpretation of what self-defense requires.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it. That's an interesting way of looking at it, John. So you don't think...
That's why I was a diplomat for 35 years.
Officially, they're just going to change the definition, which is really what we do for a lot of stuff. That makes sense.
Well, think about it, right? Our military is there to defend the United States. Yes, we agree to that. Why do we deploy our military overseas? To defend the United States. Yes, we agree on that, right?
Well, I always thought it was good at really cool ports, but maybe
Okay.
I was off.
Have fun doing it. I have no problem with, working hard and playing hard. I have no problem with that. But at the theoretical level here, okay? At the grand policy level, there's nothing inconsistent about being a self-defense force and deploying overseas. In all honesty, that's probably the most effective way to defend your country, to have the fight further away so that you protect the homeland. And I think that's how the Japanese would explain the increased use of their military in a manner that is relatively new but consistent
Well, it'll save them a lot of money. It means they don't have to release a lot of stuff off their ships and off their tanks and off their airplanes because they can keep it the same wording.
Right. But, there's going to be workarounds or terminology that continues to be somewhat humorous. The Japanese do not have any aircraft carriers, and yet they have ships with planes fly off of. So what are those? Helicopter destroyers or whatever they call them?
The Issy one. Yeah.
So that's diplomacy and military strategy isn't just a science. It's also an art.
I love it. That's really well put, John. Speaking also, we mentioned partnerships quite a bit today, and that's not just between governments and communities, but talk about how do we fund these particular activities moving into the future, and that's infrastructure. That's also supply chain and logistics, other elements of security in the great big blue Pacific. Matt, we've had a bit to do with various VC firms here in Australia and in the US. John, I'm sure you've also had a lot to do with multiple venture capital and private equity firms as well. What part do they play in I guess, protecting the Pacific and global security needs?
I'll give you one real-world example, and we touched upon it already. Fiber optic cables, right? Expensive. Profitable, but expensive. Not necessarily anything that one single part of the U.S. government or any government does anymore. And if you look at the fiber optic cable industry, it's all private sector. It's the major companies, the Googles, the Amazons, and others that are building these links because they're vital to their business plan, right? Connecting people so they can shop online and buy the goods that they want, right? Great. And so they're building these links, the private sector, nothing to do with government, right? They have the technical capability, they have the financial resources. When there's certain risk involved, they go to venture capitalists and say, is this profitable from your perspective to assist us in doing this, and this return will be thus for you. And venture capitalists are going, yeah, okay, it's a worthwhile risk to take. We're going to be part of this consortium. And that's what's happening with fiber optic cables, which are the backbone of the modern economy. But you know what? Most of these fiber optic cables are crisscrossing all over the Pacific. You know what? There's a lot of islands in the Pacific that don't have the means to do this. So they don't have the financing or the capital. But if we can build a little spur, from Palau for a few hundred kilometers to the main trunk line that Amazon and Google are financing, if we can bring in some venture capitalists, some financing agencies of the U.S. and Australian and Japanese governments, which is exactly what we did, and bring in some parties that are interested in that investment from a venture capital perspective. Bring that together. Not easy, 100% not easy, and not easy when you do it with three different commercial sort of systems: Japan, Australia, and the U.S., and three different government systems as well. But you know what? We got it done. Right? So for a relatively small investment, moderate risk, but we had the possibility of linking in to a major investment that was going to go forward. It was manageable for the private sector to be part of this. And we were able to develop our own consortium, and we are building the landing station right now for that spur. That will link up with a major fiber optic line between Asia and the United States. And also, as a strategic consequence, because why are we building these? Because the previous ones touched into the Hong Kong or the Chinese mainland. And because of concerns now about disruption or anything nefarious to do with these trunk lines, we're trying to build them through the Pacific Islands now and their EEZs and their waters, rather than have them go to China and then elsewhere into Asia. So we have proven in Palau we can do this. We're working right now in Papua New Guinea on something similar. And you can expand that out, for areas like Papua New Guinea and others. Fuel lines may become another way that we can take the risk and manage the risk in a partnership with government and private sector that will meet the needs of people in Papua New Guinea, particularly in more remote areas, but also provide some benefit to us in terms of deploying our power into these areas if necessary. Hopefully not, but if we need to. So there are some, I don't want to overblow this, but there are some limited real opportunities where businesses can get the return for their investors, where government can play a helpful role, merrymaking, if you will, bringing people together, that convening power of government, and which build on something that government has nothing to do with, which is the vibrant, global economy that businesses are engaged in every day and are best at it. So those are some real world examples that we're doing now.
Is there much concern about nationalization from some of these countries?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask our Aussie friends about nationalization, right? I mean, it's, I haven't seen any nationalization yet, at least in my experience. I suppose it's always a risk. But I think thus far, at least in my 35 years, it's never been something that prevented these type of projects.
Yeah. It's interesting as well. I think we're involved in a fund called Sprint Venture Capital, John, and one of our focuses, one of our swim lanes is social impact. Now that includes, vibrant communities, telecommunications, power, especially to these particular regions. And we just received funding from the Queensland Investment Corporation, so the investment arm of the Queensland government, to help go and build a particular fund that focuses on social impact and early stage venture capital. So some of the companies that are coming through our pipeline, amazing technology. I guess so, but trying to tell investors that it's patient capital, right? As well, it's like a 10-year lockup period. Trying to show investors or potential investors that this particular region here is going to benefit from trade, commerce, security. When you're talking about fuel lines or telecommunication lines, way of the future, because governments can't keep funding everything. They won't keep funding everything. We just don't have the capital to do it. Can't keep printing money. So, how do we get that message across or succinctly to investors?
Well, I think one of it's just communication, right? I mean, I don't think that many people in the world know about this fiber optic link that we're building from Palau. Maybe some people do in the business, but very, very few globally. And then to think about what can you do to build on top of that. I live in the United States. So does Matt. Healthcare is the number one growth industry, unfortunately, in our country, because people get sick, people get old. I can't tell you how many times I turn on the TV and I see advertisements for medicines and pharmaceutical products, right? Think about telehealth, right? There's a lot of venture capital involved in telehealth. Can you imagine if we can build upon access to 5G, fast fiber optic networks, and then be able to have telehealth products available to communities in rural or remote areas? It's what we're doing in our own countries, for heaven's sake. We can use the same business plan for other areas that face similar challenges, such as in the Pacific Islands. It can be profitable, very profitable for the companies involved, can meet real social needs in these locations, and is certainly doable with the technology that we already have. And government can play a little bit of a facilitative role in encouraging that on the margin. Those are real world examples where we're not doing enough, and we're just not being creative enough. And yet it doesn't take a lot of thought to realize, oh, heck, we can transpose this model at relatively low risk into other locations and continue with our business operations and plan and dividends for our investors in a very successful way that also meets social and security goals that governments have, irrespective of what the companies, maybe companies are amoral, I don't know, I hope not. But you know what I mean? We can all be successful in this partnership. But I think the first step is to demonstrate in discrete areas, examples of success. And there maybe we're not good enough at pointing out what we're doing, how it's successful. Because let's be honest, there's some competitive, interest for companies, not necessarily to show their complete, colors. They don't want someone copying what they're doing. But I do think there are a number of places in the Pacific where we're doing things at a scale that can be replicated. Usually the problem is, these are too small for companies to get interested in. I get it, right? Pull out population 20,000 people. Not a lot of consumers or customers there. But if you do it across the region, then you have the scale.
But telehealth's a great example, mate. I mean, health's a very important part to national security. We class it as a critical industry in our world. And there are companies here in Australia. So looking at the proximity of Australia, Queensland as well, to the Pacific Island. Some amazing telehealth companies and providers of products that are here that are now backed by, for example, Woolworths Group. They've started a company called Healthy Life. Now they're aimed to get more of the shopping basket, right? Aspen Medical, an amazing Australian success medical company that really focusing on the South Pacific and Indonesia. We're just talking about telecommunications here when we're delivering health services. You've got a healthy, safe community in the Pacific. Well, you're winning hearts and minds.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, but you back that up with a way to get the products that they need then once they get the solutions to their telehealth needs. But that's that logistics,
right?
Kind of hub and spoke system, and that's another big win.
And even if you move from telehealth to more bricks and mortar, hospitals are expensive businesses, but urgent care clinics, medical, centers run by private sector companies are big business in the United States and I think elsewhere. That sort of business model, built on telehealth, so they can refer, the scans back to folks in Queensland or somewhere else or in the U.S., having the access to medications through these urgent care centers, building up the pharmaceutical industry, at least the provision of medicines. Their government has a role, right, to cut back some of this red tape that's impeding this. There are real opportunities that are present now and can only grow. But the private sector is key to that. And government really should stay out of the way, and if anything, help, free up the ability of business to do this. Because, you wouldn't want the U.S. government building a hospital. It would take forever. And I think the private sector can do a much better job, right? But you would want, I think, the government to explain the benefits to companies and help them manage the risk. And their government has a role.